Americans than ever know that global warming movement's built on questionable science. They're also aware that climate change scientists have been caught red-handed fudging data. They also know the economy could collapse chasing this hoax, while Al Gore and his cronies pocket big bucks. So Gore's honeymoon is over before it began.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Audie Cornish.
And I'm Melissa Blond. Next month, a scientific committee sponsored by the United Nations will put out its latest assessment of climate change. The report is expected to underscore, yet again, that climate change is a serious problem and that human beings are largely responsible.
But Mark, you and I gotten into this before, and I'm no expert on this, so I always defer to guys like you.
They keep trying to say the Earth is heating up when it's not. Every high school kid has not experienced global warming. All elementary school kids have experienced a slight global...
Convinced as a body of scientists that the increase in carbon dioxide and therefore global warming is arising from human activities on the planet today.
I don't believe climate change is real. I think this is global warming hysteria and alarmism.
Animals are migrating at different rates. Plants are migrating north that never made it north before because they can now sustain the warmth that is there. They're plants that are getting fertilized earlier than before. The migration patterns have shifted. And so nature is telling us nature already knows the answer to what it is everyone here is arguing about.
With all this conflicting information, how do we know which information is accurate? The first step is to check your sources. That's why we've included citations throughout this video. The human brain has been shaped over time to communicate in social groups and survive in the natural world. In these situations, we often make quick, efficient, and pretty good decisions. However, in an information-dense world such as ours, with radio, television, and especially the internet, we are consuming increasing amounts of information from various sources with various levels of credibility and different agendas. In this situation, these usually quick, efficient, and adaptive processes are prone to particular shortcomings. Shortcomings that certain people and organizations have capitalized on to keep the doubt alive on the issue of climate change. Our goal, then, is to uncover some of these psychological processes that account for both our denial of climate change and our susceptibility to disinformation campaigns, with the hopes that by understanding how our brains work, we will be able to draw more informed and responsible conclusions about climate change.
The first step in understanding the human brain is understanding confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is the process where a person seeks or interprets information only to back their position. People often deny that there's been a change in Earth's temperature. To support this position, individuals will often look at a small portion of the temperature record. From point A to point B, it may or may not show that there has been an increase in Earth's temperature. While, if the individual were to step back and look at from point A to point F, for example, they would see that there has been an increase in Earth's temperature in the past couple decades.
Another psychological process that helps explain why people have been misinformed about the issue of climate change is the mere exposure effect. Now, what this effect says is that the mere exposure to certain stimuli increases one's preference or attitude towards that stimuli. Now, the media has often said that there's a debate in climate change, that the science is split, that they're unsure, that there's so much uncertainty. Now, what happens is people just adopt that as their preference as well because they've been exposed to it. However, the most recent IPCC report says that they're 95 to 100% sure that the most recent warming trend is because of humans. I'm going to make the assumption that, like me, you like to have accurate information as well. However, sometimes our brains can make this particularly hard. Another aspect of confirmation bias is called counting the hits but not the misses. Now this is a tendency to remember confirmatory evidence but not remember disconfirming evidence. So even if you were exposed to the right information, if you had already previously believed the wrong information, this can make it very hard to get that accurate information that everyone wants. For example, if you're one of the people who doesn't think that climate change is happening or it's not really a problem, you may be surfing the web and come across dozens of articles that talk about the reality of climate change and the things that people are doing to take steps to fight this serious problem. However, you may not count those misses, but what you might remember is the one article, blog, or YouTube video, perhaps, that talked about how climate change isn't really a problem or that it's not really happening. That's counting the hits and not the misses. Another factor of confirmation bias is called giving greater weight, which is the tendency to give greater weight to that evidence that supports your conclusion. For example, in the 2007 IPCC report, amidst the hundreds of thousands of facts, there was one error. This error ended up being called Glacier Gate. And for those that don't want to believe the reality of climate change, this became enough evidence to dismantle the entire science of climate change. So instead of looking at the hundreds of thousands of facts that are contained within the 2007 IPCC report, these people just focused on that one error. Another aspect that leads to confirmation bias is overconfidence, which is the tendency to be more sure of yourself than you should be. And Dunning and Kruger, two psychologists, actually found out that those who knew the least about a topic were the most likely to be overconfident. What do tobacco smoke, secondhand smoke, the ozone hole, acid rain, and climate change all have in common? Each of these have been denied, often by the same group of people, and misrepresented as scientific controversy and debate by media outlets. Another thing they have in common is that accepting these as problems meant making changes in people's lives, things that people don't want to do sometimes. The Pollyanna principle states that people have a tendency to give greater weight to evidence that supports things that they would like to be true, rather than evidence that supports things that they would like to be false. This principle helps explain why particular issues are especially susceptible to disinformation campaigns. Deep down, we don't want them to be true. There are all sorts of think tanks that use trigger words such as liberty, freedom, prosperity, who in turn sponsor people to write books, write magazine articles, and even put people onto TV that claim to be climate experts when oftentimes they're scientists in an unrelated field or they're just PR people. And the thing that people don't realize is that they don't know that these people are being paid to deny the science. So this leads into the topic of attributional logic, which is the psychological process where people attribute characteristics to other people. The simple equation goes like this: behavior minus situational pressures equals attribution. So what happens is people see the behavior, which is denying the science, or writing books about how the science isn't real or how climate change isn't anything to worry about. And because people are unaware of these situational pressures, they can't minus them out from the behavior. So they often attribute that these people are being honest, or that they really don't believe, or that they really have reasons and evidence to support that the science isn't right. Now, that's why we need to advocate that there's more transparency in the media, and that these people's funding and agendas are revealed so that we can minus out these situational pressures. Take us, for example. We're working on a school project for a class called Climate Change, Disinformation, and Denial. The situational pressures for us to make this video and talk about this are pretty high. So, don't trust us. Look up our sources. Check out our information. I ensure you that they're accurate, but don't just take my word for it. The goal here is that by teaching you about some of these processes, you, me, and everyone else becomes more responsible consumers of information. Although having accurate information is extremely important, it's also important that you do things with that information. Now that could be further educating yourself, educating others, starting conversations with people, or even beginning projects that take the issue of climate change seriously. The reason why this is so important is because psychological research reveals that there's two types of norms that operate. There's descriptive norms, which is just a description of how people typically act or behave, and there's also prescriptive norms, which is how one ought to act or ought to behave. But various research reveals to us that when you pit descriptive norms against prescriptive norms, descriptive norms will always win. So people often do as you do and not as you say. So that's why it's so important that you do things. And that's the real power of your actions. Because by doing things about climate change, whether it's starting conversations or talking to people, you're actually creating a new norm for others to follow. As mentioned earlier, there's so much information out there.
So if you search hard enough, you can find information to disprove any claim you can come up with. It is important that you don't start with your conclusions and then look at the information, because that is likely to then end up in confirmation bias.
Instead, you should look at all the information unbiasedly and then draw your conclusions.
And we believe that if you do this, you will draw the same conclusions that we have.
Which is that climate change is real. It is happening. The globe is getting warmer, and the most recent trend is due to human reasons.
But remember, having the right information isn't always good enough. You have to act on that information.
These seemingly small actions have a huge impact. People look to others to know what's normal, what to be concerned about, and what to do next.
So start conversations. Talk to your friends, talk to your family, even talk to strangers.
Together, we can make caring about the climate and taking action normal.